Participating in Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Today we have the feasts of Saints John and Paul. These were both officers in the army, and they were martyred in the year, I think it was 362, at the hands of Julian the Apostate. Not much is known of their lives, except they were of high status and wealth and honor, all of which, however, they despised for the sake of the gospel. And when Julian the Apostate came to power, he required everyone in the government, the secular government, to swear an oath of allegiance to the emperor, which of course required sacrifice to the gods, Jupiter especially. So not a whole lot is known. So they were firm and constant in the faith. But the good thing about hearing of the lives of the saints is it gives us a chance to look back at history and see that it's not so different 2,000 years ago from the way things are today. So we're going to pause there in the lives of Saints John and Paul. We're going to return to their martyrdom and talk for a bit about the reign of Julian the Apostate. Now that was short. It was only 2 years, but it was following the Emperor Constantine and his sons. Now, Constantine had come to power after the year 312, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and then there was the Edict of Milan, granting tolerance to Christianity in the Roman Empire in 313, and then he ruled for the next almost 30 years, 20-some years, Emperor Constantine, and he was baptized on his deathbed. Right, the whole time he's helping out the church and doing all these things, he's not even baptized yet. He died in the year 337, and one of his sons, Constantine II, he was an Arian heretic. And so you had Constantine, but then you had a heretic emperor for about 20-some years, and then you had an apostate emperor, and that's Julian the Apostate. Now Julian, when he entered or became emperor, wanted to reestablish paganism as the official religion of the empire. And he failed in a spectacular fashion. Like, he utterly failed to reestablish paganism, and in fact, the measures that he took succeeded in putting the church even more firmly in control. So that's the way that God always works. The way he did it, though, now initially, he issued an edict of Julian the Apostate, issued this edict that all religions are welcome. All religions are accepted by the government. Everybody can have their religion here. We're impartial. Now, when you do that, when the state does that, that is an attempt to weaken whatever religion is prominent, because you put every other religion on the same level. And religious tolerance, like all religions are equal, has never, ever been taught by the church, has always been condemned and always seen as a bad thing. There is only one religion willed by God. There's only one truth. And all these other different religions, which claim all kinds of false and contradictory things about God and truth and the world and man and reality, they can't all be true, and they're not all the same. But many Catholics today would have that same idea. Oh no, we should be tolerant of all religions. You shouldn't be. Some religion, any religion other than the Catholic Church is in some way bad, and many religions are evil. And any government that wants to weaken the church or weaken the truth, that's what they do. They put because then the government becomes the custodian of truth. Yeah, all you contradictory and false religions, sure, we the benevolent government are going to let you exist. Right? And we the benevolent government are over you, and by the way, you had better remember that. Right? That's what happens when you have a government pretending to be impartial. A government that doesn't have a religion, atheism is its religion. And even in this country, the founding fathers, they weren't really Christians. They were deists, Freemasons, and it's this weird kind of syncretic Christianity. But so Julian did this, and that was bad for the church. But he did something. This is his catastrophic fail. He was looking at the success of the Christian church, the Catholic Church, and in an attempt to catch up, he modeled the official pagan religions. He tried to make them more like the church. One of the, I think the quotes of the pagans was, Christians were proving them inferior. They feed not only their own poor, but ours as well. So Julian, some of the things he did is he attempted to persuade the pagan priests to display better morality. He expanded the charitable giving to the poor, and he structured the pagan priesthood and gave it a unified hierarchy, which it had never had before. And he sought to unify paganism by having one way of celebrating the liturgy and not all these different disparate ways. So in short, he was turning paganism into the clone of Catholicism. And the result was you had all these pagans were like, well, if we're no different than Christianity, why don't we just become Christians then? Because guess what? Christians are better Christians than we are. Like when you have a pagan religion trying to imitate Christianity, it's not going to work and still be pagan. Now, what's the lesson we can learn from history there? In the 1960s, the Catholic Church looked at the Protestant religions and said, you know what, we need to make the Catholic Church more like these Protestant religions. And we're going to make it more accessible to these Protestants. It's going to be an easier move for them to leave Protestantism and come into Catholicism, because we're going to change our liturgy, we're going to change everything we do in the Catholic Church to make it look more like Protestantism. What did the Catholic Church do? Destroyed itself. And people are like, well, if there's no difference between us and Protestants, why don't I just be Protestant then? Because it's a whole lot easier. You know, Protestantism is Catholicism without the guilt, right? Just do whatever you want, confess your sins to God. All right, I'm good. So if the church knew human nature, if the church paid any attention to psychology and history, she would have known, don't do this. This is going to be a suicide, ecclesiastical suicide for the church, which it was, and people still don't want to admit that when you turn, you know, Protestants are better at being Protestants than we are, right? Protestantism they are way better Protestants than the church is. When the church tries to clone somebody else and imitate it, it doesn't work. Be what you are. The problem in the church today is a crisis of identity. The church doesn't know who she is, doesn't know her own identity. The problems began when the church started apologizing for being what she was. So anyway, that's just a little lesson that we can learn from history. Don't clone something else. Be yourself. Right? I can't change who I am. That ought to be the church's little hashtag. We can't change who we are. We're the one true church, and we can't change that. So this is what Julian the Apostate attempted to do, and he destroyed paganism. And in fact, on his deathbed, his final words, Galilean, you win. Right? He admitted defeat. But in the meantime, back to our Saints John and Paul, they were absolutely steadfast. They were, again, positions of high influence, lots of power, and they gave it all up, and everybody saw that. And they were imprisoned by Terentinian, the judge, and he gave them 10 days, after which they still refused, and then he had them beheaded. Terentian was his name. Now here, I think this is from Butler's Lives of the Saints entry. Butler says, unclean spirits kept out of the emperor's household and even the entire city were prevented from doing all that they wished by the godly living of these good servants, Saints John and Paul, by their prayers and their reparations. But when they died, nothing kept back that evil flood of impure spirits, and they infested the governor's palace and the city. There's like an outbreak of paganism in the city when Julian the Apostate began doing his martyrdoms and instituting all of his pagan practices. And so the judge Terentian, his own son, inexplicably became blind, and treatment was sought to no avail until he visited the burial place of our martyrs, John and Paul, whereupon his sight was restored. This miracle convinced Terentian the judge, who had them executed, and he himself converted, and would end up writing an account of their lives and their condemnation. So how about that for a conversion? And Saints John and Paul, they had no idea that was going to happen after their death. They had no idea the good example that their lives was going to be made manifest to people. They died, and apparently having lost everything. That's always the case with Christ and with the martyrs, is it feels like you've lost everything. It feels like everything is wrong. But when you still do the right thing, even unto death, it turns out that was the absolute best thing to do anyways. And even here, we can learn something from this example. When the leader, when the governor, when the head is evil and permits paganism and even promotes it, and when those good men are removed from positions which have been holding back the flood of evil, what do you think is going to happen? So what do we think? You're going to see an increase of that kind of evil. But what can we do, right? We endure it. And this evil, tyrannical reign of Julian the Apostate was short-lived, only 2 years. But anything is short-lived, right? What is man's life on earth? 70 years, 80 if he's strong, as the psalmist says. 70, 80 years is nothing in light of, the thousands of years the church has been around, and of course in the light of eternity. So if anything, let us be encouraged. First of all, maybe studying history, church history, would be very enlightening for many. But be encouraged by the examples of Saints John and Paul. They had it all, and it was as nothing to them. They didn't care. It was all rubbish compared to their love of Christ. And that's always, always, always the truth of sanctity is a person's love for Christ. And that can be, it can be hard to gauge who really loves Christ and who doesn't. Really, it comes down to persecution. Persecution shows those who truly love Christ and those who don't. Those who are just either imitators or had the appearances of it. It's always going to be persecution, jail time, and so on. That's the truth of things. So again, don't be faint-hearted. Don't lose hope, but simply keep praying and keep praying that God will help us pass the test. Right? Help us pass the test. And what you can think of is every day we have little tests. Getting up out of bed, facing the day. That can be a real struggle for people. Doing our duties, doing the housework, taking care of the children, doing my job, enduring, depression, living alone, being lonely, and having no one to talk to. Those are all little tests that takes courage, and it takes resignation, and it takes generosity. Are you willing to give that suffering to God? Are you willing to say, okay, I'm in a lot of pain, and sure, it's okay to ask God to take it away, but are you also willing to say, look, I'm going to give this pain to you, and I'm being generous. I will generously accept this suffering, and even more, if you want. Right? That's the only way. That is the best way to prepare ourselves for whatever may happen in the future, is accept the current suffering well, right now, today, whatever that may be. So that's what we should ask for from God, right? That's the grace we should ask for, is the ability to suffer well for love of Him. And that we can pray to Saints John and Paul for that courage and that strength.